You're listening to Honestly Mental, the podcast, and I'm your host, Erika Diaz. I'm a wife, a mama, a woman in leadership, but y'all, I'm a perfectly imperfect human. I have depression, PTSD, and generalized anxiety disorder, and I am figuring it out every single day. It's really been quite the journey, so this podcast aims to provide a raw and authentic approach to several issues surrounding mental health. Through the lens of our guests and I, we will provide insight into how we navigated our own challenges through honest and vulnerable conversation. We are building a community of individuals committed to changing the world one conversation, one person at a time. We are raising awareness by destigmatizing mental health through continuing the conversation. We are providing hope and ultimately have a goal of saving the lives of those who may be feeling dark and alone. Hello, and thank you for joining this week's episode of Honestly Mental, the podcast. And I am so excited to welcome our special guest today, Amanda Riffee. So welcome, Amanda. I am so excited that we're going to be chatting today. But before doing that, I want to go ahead and introduce you. So Amanda is an internationally certified executive coach for women. She is also a thought leader and event speaker with a business degree and 17 years of corporate experience. She's the host of her own podcast, Unleashing You with Amanda Riffee, a happy wife and mom of two. I also have two little kiddos, so we might be able to talk about that. Amanda's mission is to help women unlock their mindset, see their worth, and create a career and a life that they love with no burnout required. Amanda resides in Colorado with her family and loves traveling to new places while spending time with other powerhouse women who are passionate about personal growth and enjoying this beautiful life, which makes you a perfect guest for this podcast too. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we get started, I always like to ask, kind of what brought you to the podcast? Why are you here sharing your story? And then we can just dive into your journey and what we're going to be talking about, which is workaholic tendencies. I have been there from previous episodes. People know that. But that's one of the topics, as well as your own mental health journey. So please share with us why you're here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I am such just a huge believer in the universe brings brings people together at just the right times. And I know you and I were both speakers on a virtual event. It's called Thrive through the ASA. And I heard you and your story, and I just absolutely loved how vulnerable and real you were. And that is what I am about too. And so I just felt that connection right away. And you had mentioned hey, I have a podcast. If anybody, ever wants to be a guest, let me know. And so I don't think I hesitated. I just reached out right away and was I feel like this would be such a great collaboration and just a great way to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that and listening in. That was such a great event, wasn't it? It was so empowering. Good. It's always so good. ASA, of course, they have their live conference in Nashville. Will you be attending that?
I will not. The timing doesn't work out for me this year, but I mean, I can only imagine because the virtual space was so good that the live one is gonna just blow the roof off.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too, virtual conferences can be really difficult.
Yes.
Especially to get the engagement. But the way ASA, the speakers, the content, everything was amazing. And even at times it was hard to read the chat because it was going so fast for all of the interaction, which is amazing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I feel like we could talk about that all day, but I feel like one of the things, and this is I think relevant to what we're going to talk about anyway, is one of the things they do so well is they bring in women and speakers who are willing to share their own story. And it was not just like, oh, let me teach you this lesson, but it was really like, hey, here's where I've been, here's where I am now. I'm not any different than you, right? We can all do it together. And it was just really that sense of, wanting to support each other, feeling like we aren't alone. And when you have those types of conversations, the connections just grow so fast, whether you're in person or in a virtual space.
That's true. And I think that, like you said, we could talk about this all day. Who knew that we were going to be talking about ASA so much? But
right, such a plug.
yeah, I mean, it was right. It was definitely a place where you could commiserate with one another, and certainly felt like that you weren't alone, right? That was huge. I got that from the conference. I think the chat and everything. So anyway, all that to say, I'm so glad that you reached out, and you did without skipping a beat. And so now we're here. And my talk at ASA was about how my identity, how work became my identity, right? And that was 20 plus years in the making, and all sorts of, habits that I have to unlearn, looking at my life and reprioritizing what is important to me were parts of untethering my identity and my self-worth from work. So I would love to hear from you how, you operate in the workforce, because I think we probably had some similar tendencies. But why don't we go ahead and start there?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned in the beginning, like I've been in corporate for 17 years, 16 of those with the same company, and in the staffing industry. Hence why we were both at that same event. But with that, like when I think of like graduating high school or any of that, like I always had career dreams. Yes, I always thought I was going to get married. I also thought I was going to have kids. I did do both of those things as well. But like my main big dream was like just having a successful career. Like I really wanted to climb that corporate ladder, and make it to the top and all of those things. And so when I started out in my corporate career, number one, it was around 2008. So I started actually on like a temp to hire type of position. I guess I was a little like delusional at the time. They're like, we might not be able to hire you on permanently. But I was like, I believe in myself. I can do this. I'll prove it to you. Like, you'll hire me. I know you will. And so I started that way. I did end up getting hired permanently right then was when we hit the 2009 recession. And so in my very early career years, I felt so lucky to have a job because I was, some of the newest people on the team. Every time there were cuts, I was like, I'm sure it's going to be me. And luckily it wasn't, but it also instilled in me, like, I am so lucky to just be exactly where I am right now. And so that actually formed now in hindsight, a lot of how I approached my career. And so I was a huge yes person. That was in my personal life too. Yes person to everything. You need me to take a project. You need me to do this. Like I will say yes. It doesn't matter if my plate's already full. Like I am doing it because I wanted to prove my worth, prove my value,
People
climb that
pleasing
ladder.
maybe a little bit.
And I think you and I had talked about the story where it was around 2013. I had made it to what was my dream job at the time. And that was a national learning and development role. So huge opportunity for me. It is still the catalyst, I think, for a lot of the positions that came after that for me. But it was located in another state. And it entailed doing a lot of in-person training. And so instead of relocating, I opted for frequent travel. Again, not villainizing the company. They did nothing wrong. Like, here was the position. I was like, yes, I am willing to do all of that. And so I was traveling when you add it up between all of the different things, I was probably traveling about 80% of the time. And I had just had my second baby. And I mean, he was 6 months old, I think, when I took this job. And I saw my family more on FaceTime than I did in real life. And it was all me. I was such a willing participant. And I just felt like that was what I had to do to be successful. And I had seen so many, whether it's in society or personal life, but men do the same thing, travel all week, be at home on the weekends. And that was just what you had to do. It was just the sacrifice they had to make. And so in my mind, it was the mom doing it this time instead of the dad.
Yeah.
And, it took, a traumatic experience in my life. Unfortunately, my only brother passed away, and trauma changes you, and it completely changed my perspective. It made me question, like, what am I doing all of this for? And I felt something in myself, aside from the grief, start to transform. And I went to my leaders and I asked for what I needed. And it turns out I got it. Like, they were able to add another person to the team. I cut my travel in half. There were so many things. But I think the moral to that story is I didn't ask for it. I just felt so lucky to be where I was that I was like, yes, I will do anything, but at what price? And now that's what I work on with my clients too, is, building that confidence to be able to ask for what you need. And a lot of times people show up for you.
It's crazy too. That story just resonates so much with me because I did the same thing. I didn't really, now I don't know about your like upbringing, but I know, and we can get into this obviously, but I know that success from a career perspective was really important to me because my parents didn't really hold consistent jobs. We were, I would say financially constrained in a lot of ways. And I didn't have somebody who was a good role model in the workplace, really. And I knew, though, that I did not want to be like my parents in that regard. And so I was going to bust my butt and work my butt off and, and just make sacrifice after sacrifice. And to your point, like, it's important not to villainize the companies because we were the ones that said yes. And I'm a people pleaser at heart. I try not to be, but part of it, I think, is actually just the way I embrace people. But balancing saying yes to things I'm really not, passionate about, or maybe I don't want to do, has been something I've been working on for a couple of years now. And you're right. Traumatic experiences definitely change perspective. It's unfortunate that sometimes we have to go through those experiences to get to a place where you and I are both now.
Yeah.
Mine was my mental health crisis, and recognizing that, I mean, that was a challenge because for me, I don't know if it was the same for you, but like my kids and my husband came after work, and it was very evident to me that they came after work. And that is mind blowing to some people, but it happens a lot. So,
Yeah. And it's hard to even say. I'm so proud of you for even like saying that out loud of like, yeah, it's hard to, even if you think that in your head, you're like, yeah, but I can't say that out loud. Like I would never, but you're 100% right. Like when I think of how your actions and your behaviors show what is most important to you. So you might say, oh, I have this list of values and it's family, it's this, it's this, it's this. But if your actions don't line up with that, what you're actually prioritizing is different.
yeah, absolutely. And then it leads you on a path to burnout, which is something I know you talk about often. And let's go back to the situation with your brother, if you
Yeah.
don't mind.
Yeah,
So,
of course.
he had some mental health challenges himself, and ultimately, sadly, he died by suicide.
Yes.
So how did that event, we know from a work perspective how that shifted your mentality, but how did that impact your mental health and your mental health journey? What did that look like for you? Because, someone you love just couldn't see all the love that they had in the world in that moment, right? And so I'd love to hear from you about how that experience changed you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's such a powerful question because I talk openly about this part of my story. I sat with my parents for a long time of like, hey, I want to start sharing this because it's not just my story that I'm sharing, right? It impacts a lot of people. But we do mostly talk about it from, hey, it's an important part of my career journey. It's important part of, who I am now. But a lot of people don't ask about, how did it really impact you and shape your mental health and your mindset and all of that. And I will say, at the very beginning, grief is grief. It's just all over the place. There's just so many things to work through. It was the first time I had ever lost somebody who was that close to me. I had lost grandparents, things like that, where you're really sad, but then you can make logical sense of it. Okay, that's just the way things are. That's how life works. And then you can move on with your life. And this was the first time I couldn't do that. Like I couldn't make logical sense of it. It's one of those things that, you see now all of the sayings around like grief comes in waves and, all those kinds of things. So there was a lot of things that came out of that I didn't realize. Of course, guilt was one of the biggest things, having to, relive all of those last moments and, what could I have done differently? And was I not a good enough sister? Did I outshine? Like there's just, your brain just goes to all of these crazy places. And I will say at the time, I definitely should have gotten a therapist. I did not. I have since then. At the time, I did not, because my mindset was, I'm strong. I can get through this. I have the tools, all of those things. I would not recommend taking that route. But, it shaped me in a lot of ways that I am thankful for today. And a lot of things I even had to work through after that. Like I said, I was a yes person before. I had a lot of people pleasing tendencies. I didn't at the time realize, but I was then felt like I needed to live for my parents because
Oh, yeah.
I was the only child that they had left. And so, if I wanted to move to another state, which I ended up doing years later, there was so much guilt around that. Like, how can I leave my parents? All of those types of things that I've had to since work through to be able to really live for myself while I love my parents and I'm super connected to them and close with them. I can't fill that gap. And so there was a lot of things like that again, I've since had to work through, but I think also it just really, and you'll see, on things that I post or on my website, one of the biggest things that I say is, turning someday into today. And I think the biggest thing that it showed me was that not to sit on our dreams. If we have big dreams, if we have things that we want to do and accomplish, places we want to go, things we want to experience, lives we want to lead, like let's make that happen today. So that is one of the biggest things that I think is why I share that story so often, is because it led me to that. And I would not have all of the different career success in my own way, all of those things, if I hadn't had that learning in my life as well.
Yeah, I've written that one down because that's amazing. Turning someday into today. I think that is actionable. It's, it's it's an easy pill to swallow, I guess, in a world where things aren't easy. It's not easy in general.
Simple is maybe, I would say that
not as simple as it sounds, but
yeah,
it's one that is, I think, worth remembering from a life lessons perspective. And so when you were going through all of that, so you did mention that you didn't get therapy right away, and I can relate to the being strong. I also got to a point where I didn't want to be strong anymore. Like after different events, traumatic event after traumatic event or whatever, like I got to a place where because I was successful in my career, people were like, "Oh, you're so strong, you're resilient." And I was kind of sick of that. Like I just wanted to be normal, whatever normal is, right? And of course, can't see the air quotes, but can you relate to that?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And to be honest with you, I can relate to that even today, because I think part of, and again, you look at any of my messaging, you look at anything and what I'm about, like I use the word powerhouse, unstoppable, like, and those are things I truly believe in. And recently, just as a couple months ago, May was just an off month for me in general, like a lot of feelings of scarcity. We had a lot of things going on family wise in our personal life. Just, I felt like I needed to be strong for a lot of people. While at the same time, I wasn't in that space myself. And so I was, talking with my coach because I am a coach, but of course I always have a coach.
Yep.
And she's does such a beautiful job of holding space for me. And, we were talking through and I was like, I don't know why I'm struggling so hard right now. And she was one that was able to reflect back to me, like your concept of self is that you are the strong leader. And when you feel out of that, you feel like a fraud. You feel like, how can I tell other people to go do this when I'm feeling so crappy? When it's just feeling human, right? Like it doesn't matter how strong we are. There are times where we need people to be able to hold us. And we need to feel poured back into. I always pride myself on being able to hold space for myself, which I do. I'll create space, I'll do self-care. But this at the same time, like sometimes you just want somebody to be like, it's okay, I got this for you. And it was an internal battle that I was fighting within myself because I was thinking like, even with all the work and all the tools that I have in that moment, I was still thinking, okay, but I still have to because I have all of these tools, like I should be able to figure this out right now and action my way out of it, when sometimes you just have to let go and you just have to be vulnerable. And so I did a lot of inner work, a lot of emotional things in that month. And turns out June was like one of the highest revenue months I've had in my business. Like I took a 2-week retreat in Greece. Like June was just amazing, but I really think it's because of all of the inner stuff I did in May and just giving myself space, giving myself grace, asking for what I needed, and just being okay with not being that strong leader all day, every day.
Yeah. And you're so right that it's just about being human. We put on these personas externally facing, and where the strength, the resilience, the powerhouse comes from, right? And if you're not holding space for yourself, it can be really easy to get caught up in that externalization of your personality and who you are, especially as somebody who, if you're a yes person and having people pleasing tendencies. I think those two tendencies are constant in our lives. And if you happen to have those tendencies, it's a constant effort to combat them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really great to hear that from somebody else. I was feeling the same way when I went and did a second stay, if you will, and a partial hospitalization program. And part of me was like, I just had my mental health crisis a year ago and I did this program and I have all these tools and I'm not using them.
Mhm.
But the fact of the matter is, when you're in crisis or something like that, sometimes it's hard to find those tools. Even
Yeah.
though I have a binder, there were definitely some things in hindsight I would do differently.
Yeah.
Um, there I have tools that are tangible that I could have pulled out and I didn't. I think that was because I didn't realize I was entering crisis again, because it manifested so differently. But once I was there, I was like, I have to go back. And sure, did I relearn a lot of the same practices and, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, like that is something that is the foundation for PHP programs. And, it was a good refresher. And I just had to remind myself that it didn't mean that I was weak. It didn't mean that I wasn't strong, because it's being strong and the strength around, that and resilience is a double-edged sword, because there are the moments where you're like, dang it, I don't want to be strong. And then you're still in that same exact moment. And the opposite of that is true, where you're like, dang it, I'm not strong, And so
Mhm.
it's complicated to navigate through if you don't have the right tools and resources.
Yeah.
So you mentioned how you give space for yourself and the grace you give and the compassion you show for yourself. I would love to hear more about what that looks like in your
Sure.
world.
Yeah. And I mean, I think where this stemmed from was just my many bouts with burnout. So, I have it's almost like you were just saying, like it was like the lesson I needed to keep learning. And sometimes you just have to go a level deeper and go a level. You're like, no, I already learned that. I'm not going back. I already learned that lesson. Thank you. I'm done. But so often there's more that we still need to unpack there. And that's why we find ourselves in, a similar situation, or like you said, yours manifested so differently. So I'm sure there was even a different learning in that piece for you. And so I think with kind of each one of those chapters of my story that, were centered around burnout, I think I picked up more tools along the way. But one of the things that, and I work on this with my clients too. I actually just had a client last month. She showed up for our call and she was like, I know we were supposed to be like putting together all this stuff. I want to launch this business, but she's like, I'm not there. Like, I feel like I need a break, like all those things. And so we just totally pivoted. And that's what I did in May as well was, okay, I had pieces of my career, my business that, I could show up for. I had the capacity to show up in the way I needed to show up. So I didn't, just completely black everything out. But in my mind, and I don't think the external world could see this, but in my mind, I was doing the bare minimum. I was showing up for exactly what I had to show up for. And that was it. I wasn't in my normal, okay, let me take on this new project or launch this new thing or feeling inspired here or even, asking to like, schedule things with friends. None of that. It was just the bare minimum. And then the rest of it was, okay, where can I give myself grace and where can I give myself space? And so for me, that's a lot of long walks. That's time by myself. I recharge my batteries by myself, even though people would just be like, oh, she's definitely an extrovert. But I actually recharge my batteries by myself. And so, I've thought of like, okay, I'm doing nothing but watching a show tonight, or, I'm going to take this long walk, or whatever that might look like. I think the key to that is I would ask myself, what do I actually need right now? Like, what is my body craving right now? Sometimes it might be craving movement and it might be like a go outside in nature, go, do something. Sometimes it might be craving silence. Like I spent a lot of date, like normally I'd be like, okay, what's that podcast I'm going to listen to? Or, that kind of thing. And it was like, no, be, just be with your thoughts, just feel the emotions. Like it's okay. Um, and sometimes it was like, just turn off your brain for a little bit, like just watch some reality TV, like you're fine, everything's fine. And so I think that shows up differently for everyone. And it definitely shows up differently for me, depending on what I'm craving. But I think it's just really that awareness of, what do I need right now? What does my body need right now? And then I think couple that with, I was holding space for a lot of people in my family. So there really wasn't somebody that I could lean into in those moments because they needed me to be the strong one for different reasons. But what I did do was I have a functional wellness coach that I work with from time to time. So I scheduled some sessions with her. We did some somatic healing. I have my own coach that, like I said, she's great at holding space for me, no matter, like, I'll be on a voice note, just crying, being like, this is where I'm at right now. And so I found those ways and those people that I could lean into who could hold space for me, because I didn't necessarily have that in that moment with some of the people that I'm used to being able to do that for. I think of that book. I read it a long, long time ago, but one thing in there is called Option B. And it's, I think it's Sheryl Sandberg. I know I'm on a podcast, so I should probably know. No, it's not Sheryl Sandberg. It's, shoot. Well, I'm sure we'll find it and put in the show notes. But,
Yes.
but anyway, just talking about how, your life isn't going to always work out the exact way that you want it to. There are going to be traumatic events. There's going to be things that happen. And so you're kind of always living that option B, like that plan B. But one of the things that she talked about is when you're going through trauma, or, whether it's big trauma, smaller trauma, whatever that looks like, is you can't lean into the people who are experiencing it with you, or maybe at a deeper level. You have to always lean out. Like, everyone leans out the circle a little bit, and then we're all okay. And so I've really taken to that, because I think, whether you think of a death in the family, or, something like that, where you're like, oh, well, I can't lean on that person. They were even closer to them than I was. So it's like they can lean on you, and then you lean on somebody else. And that I've taken that learning away, and really think of that, where it's like, okay, just because I can't lean on this person doesn't mean I don't have anyone that can, that can be that person for me.
Yeah, and that's really kind of the beauty of community, right? Is you have a network to where certainly you have your family, your close confidants, your best friends, and then you have network peers, you have, colleagues, you have different things like that. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's all community. And so it's really beautiful to be able to do that. And I like the idea of leaning out, because a lot of times I think we're leaning in. Yes. One of the other things that you mentioned is that you would ask yourself, what does my body need right now? What am I craving? And I think that is really a very foreign concept for a lot of people. Number one, you're talking to yourself. And this is a practice I know I ask myself out loud, And so I used to have a math teacher, and he, this is kind of a joke, but he would say, I'm not insane unless I start answering my own questions. And,
well, crap.
Yes.
Because I do that all the time.
So we are insane. You and I both.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's okay. In a good way. But it was a joke for him, because he would say that, but then he would talk to himself at his desk. He was an amazing teacher, loved him to death. Mr. Vince was his name. Mm-hmm. And, but I say that because I feel like that is probably a pretty common thought, like talking to yourself is weird, maybe. Yeah. But it's really kind of magical when you can sit with yourself and ask yourself questions. And I think it takes practice, because it's not something where you can go into a room or what have you and just say, what do I need today? Yeah. It's going to take practice sitting in that moment. Maybe it's sitting in silence and listening to your body. That's another thing. Like, my therapist is constantly like, when I'm, showing a certain type of emotion or something, she'll be like, where are you feeling that in your body? And it's so important to pay attention to those cues. I don't think people realize how interconnected all of those things are. Um, I really didn't quite grasp that until I read The Body Keeps the Score, which was a phenomenal book. And it's very clinical because it's written for therapists and whatnot, but it's not too dry, but you really, really learn about how the body is tied to your emotions and how trauma stays in the body and how different things manifest itself. So it's a really good book.
Yeah.
But what's your reaction to that? Do you think it's easy for people to kind of ask themselves what they need and care for themselves in that way?
I don't think that is easy for people. And by the way, while you're talking, I looked it up. It is Sheryl Sandberg. I wrote that
Option
book so
B,
we
Sheryl
can,
Sandberg.
yes, we can be clear on that. That's who wrote option B. Um, but yeah, I think just like you said, it is a learning. It's just like anything else. It's like working a muscle, the very first time, I'm like, oh, this is really hard. This is really hard. And that's why I think so many people feel like they struggle with meditation of like, oh, there's no way I could clear my thoughts. There's no way I can do this or sit. And I think it's just starting small. And whether it's a meditation practice, like just practice sitting in silence for 2 minutes. No other expectation, but just sit in silence for 2 minutes. And then you can continue to build your way up. You mentioned your therapist, and I mentioned a health coach, and it was very similar experiences where during that month, I was feeling like, okay, I'm checking in. I feel like I'm handling it all. I'm doing okay. Like, I'm making sure, okay, I'm not getting close to burnout. What's happening here? And then all of a sudden I started feeling like tightness in my chest. I was like, oh, I think I have indigestion. And then it was still there the next day. And then I was like, oh crap, I think that's stress. Like, I don't think that's indigestion. And so we did work through that of like, just like you said, like, oh, where am I holding this? Where am I holding this? And that can a lot of times be that then clue for you where I was in my head, thought I was doing just fine, holding it all together for everyone, where then I was like, well, then why is my chest hurting? If that's the case. So then I was like, okay, let's schedule an appointment. So I think the moral to that is when you can identify where you hold that stress. I know a lot in my jaw and my neck and shoulders are a huge spot for me. That when I see those signals, then I'm like, okay, let me get somebody who can help me with this, whether it's let me schedule time with my therapist or a coach or whoever, because you don't have to always handle it all on your own. And, that is the gift of having those professions, is that they can see it when you can't and can really help you work through that. So I think, you don't have to put the pressure on yourself to always know all of the time. But if you can start to see those signals, that's a great time to lean into somebody else.
Yeah. Speaking of signals, so let's jump back on the topic of burnout because
Yeah.
you started kind of going down the path with your own symptoms, but for those listening, what are, we both have a journey around work being our identity, wanting to climb the corporate ladder, and those types of things. We have similar experiences that we've shared just now also. But in what do you see when somebody is having workaholic tendencies or they're approaching burnout? Because honestly, it may not even be workaholics that can experience burnout, right? So what are some of the symptoms that manifest themselves as warning signs for people to be mindful of that they could be approaching a burnout?
Yeah. Oh, great question. A lot of times what I see when I'm working with clients is, yes, there are absolutely physical symptoms like we were talking about, maybe it's chest pain or headaches or fatigue, just not having enough energy to get through the day of all the things that you need to do. So a lot of physical symptoms. But even in our mindset too, the beliefs that we're telling ourselves, and I say beliefs on purpose because we think that they are true. So we think they are truths, but they are actually beliefs. It's just we can't see any other way than this way. And so a lot of things that I see is, like, again, they feel like there is no other option. Like I have to be doing X, Y, and Z. End of story. There's no other option. And one of the things that that my therapist taught me at one point was anytime we have an either or, like I can either do this or, the whole world's going to fall apart, whatever the thing is, there's only two options. It's actually a trauma response. At any point, we actually have infinite options and possibilities. So if you really feel yourself being constricted of like, yeah, sure, I'd love that dream life, but there's no possible way that can happen because I have to do this. That is one of the telltale signs. But I would say also, feeling like there's not enough hours in the day, like literally your to-do list is never ending. And I know that's like, a big joke of like, oh, we all have a never ending to-do list. But honestly, when you like really look at it and you're like, there's no way I can get all of this done, but I'm still going after it every single day, thinking that I can. People pleasing tendencies. We are overextending ourselves. We don't have boundaries. We're saying yes to everyone else, and we're putting ourselves last in that equation. All of those things are clear signs that you are either headed straight for burnout or you are already there and you might not realize it. Or maybe you do realize it and you still can't find a way out, and that's okay too.
Well, and that's why there are individuals like yourself and other professionals that help people, because this is so real. And I'd like to just comment that I did mention like workaholics and burnout. And as you were talking, I want to make sure I'm not excluding other people like stay-at-home moms, or anyone can experience burnout from their life. It's not just because you're working, not working, whatever the scenario is.
Yeah.
There are catalysts for burnout, and it's, it doesn't discriminate when it.
Yeah, absolutely. Caregivers, I think, are one of the biggest, I don't like to use the word victim, but like, one of the biggest victims of burnout, because they're giving so much to someone else, whether it's raising children, whether it's, caring for a family member, burnout hits all of us. Like you said, and the signs are very similar, no matter whether it's work related or, home life or whatever that might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I wanted to, you mentioned therapy already, but you didn't get therapy right away. So
Yeah.
what does that journey look like now? It sounds like you have a therapist, you have a couple coaches. What does your support look like? You've talked about it a little bit already in terms of self-care, self-compassion, but I'd like to explore that a little bit more too, just what your support network looks like.
Yeah. I feel like I have somebody who helps me in each one of the areas of my life. And some of them I work with consistently. Some of them it's, kind of like we were talking about before, like, okay, I think it's time to schedule a session, kind of thing as well. But I am always working on myself. Like that is something that I am always doing, because I know that I show up as a better human, a better person for my family, for my friends, for my clients, for my colleagues, for, all of those people who rely on me. I show up as my best version for them when I have my support system that I can lean into. So, my coach doubles as a lot of things for me. She's technically a business mentor and coach, but we just have such similar paths. She's further ahead in where I want to be. So she's accomplished a lot of the goals that I have. So it's a perfect fit for me. But together we work on mindset, which is probably the biggest thing. We work on strategy as well. So a lot of people think, like myself included, when I was starting a business, that I was like, okay, tell me the strategy. I will do it. I'll plug it in. We'll be successful. This is how it will be. And what I did not realize was that owning your own business is a personal growth journey disguised as a business. And so that is where, while we work on growing business, it's mostly growing me. It's growing me because my business can never surpass where I am. So we work so much on my mindset, my limiting beliefs, all of those types of things. Even though, like you were talking about before, I have those tools because I work on them with my clients. But just as a therapist has a therapist, right? It's your own blind spots. And so you still need somebody that you can pour into in that way. So she does a lot. She's a lot of things for me. But then I also, like we mentioned, my health is very important to me. And that's one of the things that when I'm getting closer and closer to burnout, that starts to take a back burner almost every single time. Like it's a telltale sign for me if I'm not getting movement, I'm eating crappy, like all those, that's the first thing to go. And so I work with a health coach as well, but I will work on, like maybe she'll have an event or, something like that. So I'll do different things. I go to women's circles, sound baths. Like it's fun to just try new things. It keeps it exciting. And it's not as daunting as like, oh, I always have to be like, oh, I have to have this membership and this subscription and all of those types of things. But it's just, what's the next thing that, again, my body's craving that I, could really use right now that feels aligned for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a coaching perspective, I'd like to know, and I'm sure you listening at home too, how do you even go about finding a coach? Because I feel like there are life coaches out there, health coaches, there are all these wide array of coaches, but specifically like life coaches and things of that nature that are working on mindset and some of those habits and self-compassion, self-care. How does one go about finding? Because I feel like Googling a life coach is probably
It
difficult.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
I tried it when I was starting a business. I was like, let me Google it. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is weird. Because it's all sponsored, like you don't get like the true results. I think that is such a great question. I think my biggest tips would be, and I have learned both ways. I have hired a coach that I learned what I didn't want in a coach. And then I have the coach that I have today who, ride or die, like love her, love her to death. She gets me fully. But I had to learn that the hard way. Not everybody has to do that. So, I think the biggest thing is figuring out what you want to get out of that partnership. So there are coaches that specialize in lots of different things. So like for me, I work with career-driven women who, really want to create their own success in their own way. They have big dreams. They dream of this, fantastic life, but they can't figure out how to get there. And then I will always add no burnout required because I feel like we can do that without the burnout. And so, if that's something that resonates with you, then that could be a great coach for you. But there, if there's something like, I really want to work on my, my health, meaning maybe it's calories in, calories out. Maybe it's finding the right diet for you. Maybe it's, whatever the thing is, like there's a coach out there that specializes in everything. So what I would say is find the one that whose story you resonate with the most, because a good coach is going to share their own story. Even though we're not going to try to turn you into us, like I say, like I'm not trying to make people follow the same path I did. That would be boring, number one. But number two, a coach should always ask you questions and bring out what the answers that are within you. So they're not there to be strictly advice givers. They're not there to tell you what to do. If they are, that's not a coach. A coach should be there to really bring out the answers from within you. So I always look for somebody whose story I resonate with, whose vibe I resonate with, the way that they're leading their life I resonate with, because I want to make sure I'm learning from somebody who is where I, aspire to be. And I also think like they shouldn't ever pressure you either in terms of like, oh, you've got to buy right now or, do this thing. Yes, accountability is huge, right? We want to make sure we're not just like holding ourselves, in this space of fear and not taking action. But, like you want that decision to feel really grounded for that person. And because they're going to be the ones that need to put in the work to get the results and do all the things. So it doesn't benefit anyone if they feel forced into, oh, I felt like I had to buy or, all of those types of things. So those would be my biggest tips is just making sure that does it feel like the right person for you? And do you resonate with their style?
That's really good advice. It reminds me a little bit of like even finding a therapist, right? And there could be
Yes.
cases where you go through trial and error. I hate to put it that way, but you may not click with somebody right away. Would a coach get offended if you don't click with them right away?
Ooh, that's a good question. I wouldn't, but I
Hopefully a
think it
good
depends
coach
on the
will.
person, how big their ego is.
Yes, that's true. And then that brings into question whether or not they should be a coach potentially. But no, I think
Exactly.
I wanted to throw that out there just because as a coach, it's dispelling some of the myths or some of the barriers that somebody may be going through in their mind. Like, well, dang, especially if you're a people pleaser and you're like, I love that you said a good coach probably isn't going to be pressuring you to buy. That's really it was good to hear that. It was refreshing. Because I feel like if you're somebody who does have a need, playing into that too much may not be a good fit. Like
Yes.
when it's more what's the word I'm looking for? It's not coming to me. But it's
Yeah,
aggressive
it's like
maybe.
we're entering into a partnership. So this needs to feel super good for me and it needs to feel super good for you. Like it does me no good if you felt like you were pressured into this or, you're never going to get the results that you want to get anyway and it's not going to be a great experience for me either. So it only makes sense that now again, if you're like, okay, yeah, I need to think about it. I'm like, okay, so just so I know, like when do you want to have a decision by? Right. Like, so that's more accountability of like, okay, yeah, I can figure that out by Monday. Okay, perfect. Like, let me know on Monday either way. Right. Like that's different than before you get off this phone, I need you to put this on your credit card. Like, and I am speaking from personal experience. I have had that happen to me where somebody has said that to me before. And
Hard to
like you said,
not
the
grab
people pleaser
for
me
it
was like,
too
I don't know. I
sometimes.
guess they have to find a credit card. What am I
Exactly.
doing? I don't even want like I need to think this through. And so yeah, a good coach should give you the space to be able to do that. But again, we're always going to be trying to hold you accountable too, because that's our job.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you at the end of the day, and this is not necessarily why you're doing it, but you're running a business yourself, and
Yeah.
so there's got to be some limitation there, like in the leeway, I guess, and what that looks like initially, without being overly forceful. I think is
Yeah,
a
for
fair
sure.
way to.
And to be honest with you, there's so much power in making a decision either way. Think of all of the energy that we expend not like sitting in indecision. Like, should I do this? Should I not do it? Should I
Ah,
do it? Should I not do it? It's actually doing you a disservice to not make a decision. So either, sit with it, of course, make sure if that's, this is the right thing for you, but then make a decision one way or the other so that you can move on. Because the amount of time and energy that we waste in our day just being like, oh yeah, I need to put that on my to-do list. Okay, yeah, I need to remember that. Or, oh, should I, shouldn't I? It's like the faster, and I feel like I'm like the queen of fast action because I realized that. And so now I'm just like, yep, it's on my mind. Do it. Don't do it. Okay, done. Move on. Like that's
yeah,
how I operate. That's not how everyone operates. But we can add so much energy back into our day when we just make a decision one way or the other.
that's so true. That makes a lot of sense. I'm sitting here pondering that because I'm like, how much do I sit in indecisiveness and of course the age old what are we eating for dinner tonight question mark.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I have maybe it's a tough question. I feel like you probably get it from time to time, but we're talking a lot about coaching.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who is interested in coaching but may have financial constraints themselves
Mm.
on being able to, because I fully recognize that not everyone can get a coach,
Yep.
let alone more than one coach for different areas of their life, right?
Yep.
And so let's talk a little bit about that. What would you say there?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think to clarify that too, so I have one that I invest in consistently. The other ones is kind of like as needed whenever I'm feeling like I need, a little extra push in here and there. Now with that, I would say a few different things. Number one, myself included, I am never going to pressure anything. Like if you truly do not, your financial situation. Like if you truly do not have the money right now, I'm never going to say like, oh, go put yourself in debt, to do any of these types of things. I do think the flip side of that though is checking ourselves, because money a lot of times is a very easy reason to say why you can't do something. When you actually unpack it, it could truly be something else. It's more fear. It's more, oh, once I say yes to that, now it's real and I got to actually do the things and I have to put myself out there. And so it's a lot easier to lean on like, oh yeah, that's a lot of money. I don't think that'll work. Now, again, everyone knows themselves best. So I would really just encourage you to see like, where is this truly coming from? Because I'll hear a lot like either money or timing, like, oh, it's just not the right time. Let me do this in, a couple months or whatever. And what it really is it's us being scared of doing it now.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say to that. But I'm also a huge, like, I will invest in myself knowing that I will get that return long term. But what I always like to make sure that I'm providing is, do they see the value? If you see the value, like I was just thinking about this today of like, I don't know, $2,000, it's a lot of money. Of course it's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But like, we would be like, oh, but I'll spend $2,000 on a couch for sure because I need a couch, right? But it's like, but what do maybe you need a coach, and it's not even the coach, it's the results that you're going to get from that. And so that's what I always try to show people is, where are you right now? Where do you want to be? And what's the value of that learning and experience? Because otherwise you're just going to stay on that hamster wheel. 5 years go by and you're still in the same place dreaming about something else. So it's like, I don't know, was it MasterCard that had that like campaign that was like, this amount, $5, this $20, this priceless.
I think, yes.
And so that's really, I think, what coaching, therapy, any of those things is like, it's honestly almost priceless if you are going to have a life-changing experience that's going to get you that next promotion, that's going to get you into a totally different career that you've been dreaming about forever. If it's going to push you to start your own business, those types of things, like it's almost hard to put a price tag on that.
Yeah, I can see that. That makes a lot of sense. And I will really appreciate that you said, your financial situation. And so, you know what you're able to do, but there's no harm in challenging yourself in those thoughts, like, because where can you allocate funds from potentially, right? Do you really need the new couch, or does the couch that you have work fine and you could do coaching, right? And again, just knowing that it's not, everybody's either cup of tea or something that is just feasible for them. So fully appreciate that. And thank you for providing.
Yeah, of course. And I probably should have also mentioned too, a lot of coaches, myself included, have things at different price points, right? So maybe your ideal situation is, yes, let's work one-on-one for months and months. And yes, you're going to see the biggest transformation from that. But there's also smaller events or, things that are at different price points. A lot of coaches, a lot of free content too. So just, be able to stretch yourself, but also there are things that are accessible to you. So even if you're not at a point where you can invest in one-on-one coaching, there is something. So don't wait until like, oh, 6 months from now, I think I'll be able to afford it. Like, let's figure out where we can do to get the ball moving for you now.
Oh, that's another really good point. I like that a lot. Um, I'm thinking I'm probably going to be following up with you maybe on coaching myself just to understand some things because
Yeah.
I think I'm at a point in my life where I need to consider it. So, why don't we do this? As we wrap up here, I'd love, if you had to leave one thing behind, what would that be? What would you say?
Oh, it's so good. And it's like, okay, all the things come in my head. I'm like, no, what's the one thing? What is the one thing? We haven't mentioned this in the one. It's one of my favorite quotes. I have it tattooed on my arm. And it's feel the fear and do it anyway. And I think that is probably what I would leave people with is, we are all doing it scared. We are always scared to take the next step. We are always nervous of like, oh, what if it doesn't work out? Or what if I put myself out there? Or what if I ask for that raise at work or that promotion or whatever? But we get confident by doing things before we feel ready. And I used to always think that I had to feel confident and then do the thing. And what I've learned is that that's actually how we build the confidence. So feel the fear, do it anyway. One small action step at a time then you're going to look back a year, 2 years, 6 months from now and be like, oh, look at what I actually accomplished with just taking small, consistent action and doing it while you're scared.
That's amazing. And we all face fear, so why not do it scared, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. I really appreciate your time today. And thank you for listening, whether you are on your commute home or wherever you may be listening from. And we look forward to the next episode. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, review. And that's how we get the message out, continue to destigmatize mental health and change lives. Thank you.